Hi everyone, my name's Helen Norman and I'm an associate in Burges Salmon's Pensions and Lifetime Savings team. I'm joined by Chris Brown, partner in our team. Welcome to the first episode of Season 5 of the Burges Salmon Pensions Pod. It's great to be on our 5th season, never quiet in the pensions industry, and there have been a lot of interesting developments over the summer since our last season 4.
Helen, yeah, that's absolutely right, isn't it? It's great to be back. It's been a really busy period since we did Season 4. And yeah, great to be on Episode 1 of Season 5.
So in today's episode, we'll be discussing defined benefit risk transfer market versus run-on. And our guest today is Sarah Brown, Principal and Senior Consulting Actuary at Gallagher Benefit Services. So Sarah is Gallagher's UK Chief Actuary, as well as an experienced scheme actuary who's been advising trustees and sponsors for well over 20 years. Sarah, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Lovely to speak to you.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for coming on.
So Sarah, we met from me hosting one of the SPP's events, but can you tell listeners a bit more about your background?
Yes, so I'm a scheme actuary and I advise both trustees and sponsors on a range of matters. And at the moment, one of the things that they're really interested in is whether they should be thinking of doing a buyout or whether they should be thinking of running on their schemes. So this is something that I've been looking at a lot, and also with my Chief Actuary hat, thinking about how we help trustees and sponsors through that kind of decision and actually helping schemes decide whether it's the right thing for them.
It's definitely a hot topic at the moment, and most of our listeners will be familiar with the recent changes in the pensions industry. But by way of a recap, Sarah, could you explain why there's such a focus on pension schemes' objectives at the moment and what's changed?
Yes, so there are a number of catalysts for these discussions, and there are also quite a lot of theoretical reasons why people should be thinking about it. But in my mind, actually, the key driver is that schemes are generally better funded at the moment, in particular due to the gilt crisis.
Yeah.
So this, together with innovation in the market, means that they've got more options and they can actually start thinking about these questions as actually something tangible rather than an aspirational discussion. So for some schemes, what this means is that they are now able to consider buyout where they really just couldn't consider it before. So although they may have wanted to buy out, it really wasn't something that they were well enough funded to do. And for others, actually, now that they are able to buy out, it really brings the conversation and the debate to the fore, because although they may have thought they wanted to transfer risk, they actually do want to continue to run on the scheme and continue to accumulate excess investment returns. So it's interesting because different schemes have different reasons for the change in focus. And all this is against the backdrop of a new DB funding code. So this new DB funding code requires trustees and sponsors to agree a long-term objective. Now, many well-run pension schemes have had a long-term objective in place for a long time, and the majority that I've spoken to have at least talked about where they want to be. But now it's really something that they need to document, they need to agree, and that's put it into even more focus. And against all that, we have Mansion House. So the government is trying to promote investment in UK productive finance. And that really represents a change in direction for DB schemes, who over the years have really been nudged towards de-risking, and indeed more than nudged in many cases. So now we've got the government actually saying, well, we have been saying de-risk, but now actually could you consider re-risking and looking at different investment strategies? So putting all into the mix, it's never been a better time to think about where you want your pension scheme to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And schemes are, they've got lots of reasons at the moment to be thinking about their long-term strategy and what the solution for the scheme will be. But sort of as we were chatting just before we pressed the record button, it's not a one and done decision, is it? So trustees can form a long-term strategy to run on, perhaps as a step towards a risk transfer project, or because they don't want to risk transfer at the moment, but that doesn't preclude them from doing it necessarily in the future.
Indeed, and I think that's sometimes we get very binary in this debate, but actually run on can be a step towards buyout over the longer term, maybe in 10 or 15 years. So it is very much, although the decision to buy out, once you've committed to a buyout, you can't reverse that. But actually with run-on, it could be a temporary decision with people changing their mind, perhaps as the circumstances of the sponsor change, perhaps as the funding of the scheme changes. So run-on is a single term that we actually use to embrace a whole load of different options.
Scenarios.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We're definitely seeing more and more of our clients currently on the journey to buying in their schemes benefits with an insurer. And Sarah, can you explain for our listeners what the benefits of buying in a scheme are?
So it can really be seen as the gold standard. So benefits are being secured in full with a third party that's backed by a strong solvency regime. So that's a great outcome for a lot of pension schemes. And ultimately, members are the reason for the scheme. So buyout can be viewed as a successful end of the journey, knowing that there's a high level of security for those member benefits from an insurer. It also can be really beneficial from a sponsor point of view because it reduces the distraction of having a defined benefit scheme. So effectively, by transferring it across to an insurer, it takes away that management time and all those ongoing running costs associated with the scheme. And emotionally, there is a reason for that as being popular as well, because over time, many sponsors have been through a lot of pain with defined benefit schemes, both dealing with volatile deficits and with ever-evolving legislative requirements, such as, dare I mention, the need to equalise GMPs. So it just feels like these things keep happening, and actually for sponsors having that moment that they can say, right, we've transferred the scheme on to somebody else, but crucially knowing our members are being looked after, that can be a really, really good result.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see, sort of an FD of a DB scheme sponsor who's been the FD for the last 20, 30 years. It does take a sort of a shift in mindset to decide that actually the scheme might be doing something else other than risk transferring as soon as we're able. But I suppose the thought there then that comes to mind is the importance of early dialogue, discussion with the trustees advisors, perhaps with company owned advisors, to really sort of map out the different options, because risk transfer is the right solution for many schemes, but doesn't need to be the only solution.
Absolutely. And those conversations are really interesting as well, because it gives an opportunity for everyone involved in the scheme to really set out what they think their expectations are for the future and what benefits the members the most within those expectations. So I think it's really positive to be able to have those discussions. And I think it's one of the really positive things coming out of the funding code. For those who haven't had the impetus to have those debates before, they're now being required to. So I'm seeing some great conversations happening, and actually it's really interesting to get down to the detail of what people want from their pension schemes.
It can be a great opportunity to forward plan as well, and for example, instruct your legal advisors quite early to produce the benefit specification, because we have seen examples where that does bring issues out of the woodwork that would need to be resolved before you approach the market. So definitely.
I mean, that's right. And then it's right for trustees to go and investigate issues and make sure that their benefit audit is in order before, starting down the line and approaching insurers or whatever. We've also seen circumstances, haven't we, Helen, of schemes where we've looked at benefit specifications and sometimes they can help reduce liabilities because something's come out of the woodwork the other way. So actually it's a case of that early planning gets your benefits in order, and if you can do that nice and early on, then that feeds into the wider discussions about what your strategy might be.
And what I am seeing is when people want to buy out, they often want to move very quickly. So yes, getting everything lined up in advance really, really helps with that, because what you don't want to be is in a situation where pricing is looking good with an insurer, there's an opportunity, and then you discover there's an issue with the benefits. So it's really good to get everything lined up and have a good project plan and be clear about what you want early on.
Definitely. And insurers are at such a low capacity at the moment, I would say, because they're oversubscribed because of the boom in buying in. So it's very interesting. Sarah, are you seeing a particular kind of scheme that would look to buy in rather than run on with your clients?
So I think I might turn that around a little bit. So the ones that want to buy in often are the ones where there are reasons that they really want to secure the benefits. They're concerned perhaps about all those things that I spoke about management time, about volatile deficits. They've kind of made that decision and they want to go on.
Yeah.
The ones who are thinking about run on more are the ones with often strong covenants, in particular because you are continuing to run on the scheme and have that reliance on the sponsor. So generally run on tends to be an option for those with the strongest covenants. Run on also tends to be quite popular for the more well-funded schemes. So in this context, I'm really talking about almost a conscious run on where you want that to happen over a long period of time. Some might be running on over a short period of time because they're not quite there with buyout funding yet. But what I'm thinking more is the ones who are saying, actually, we would like to continue to run on because we think there are benefits of not going to an insurer and actually continuing to run our scheme ourselves. And reasons for that, I think in some cases it's where trustees want to control actuarial factors. So they might think that actually the terms that they can give members are better than those that they could get from an insurer. Or there may be some element of discretionary benefits, for example, discretionary pension increases. And they may want to keep control over those so that they can pay them when the funding is good enough to pay them. And that can give better outcomes for members. And there may also be paternalistic reasons where the sponsor wants some element of control over those as well. The members of the pension scheme may be, staff that they've looked after for many, many years, and they really feel a kind of connection to that pension scheme. And we can also see that actually where we're measuring member outcomes, not just by the benefits they get, but by the service they receive. For example, what I see is schemes, spend a lot of time giving things like member portals, really good, strong administration, and indeed very long-running relationships with members. I've worked with schemes where the people serving the schemes know the members individually by name. Now, giving that away to a third party is quite an emotional decision, and I think actually they often want to keep that connection with their members. Also, there are schemes that are open and run-on can allow for continued accrual of benefits, for example, which wouldn't generally be possible under a buyout.
There's a change in actuarial standards, isn't there, that trustees are now required to consider alternative solutions to buying in with an insurer. Can you tell our listeners a bit more about that?
Absolutely. And it's not often that I'm asked to talk about technical actuarial standards. So as an actuary, this is brilliant for me. And actually, I've had a lot of people asking me about these technical actuarial standards recently. So one of our technical actuarial standards now requires, when we're advising on buyout, that we should also advise on alternative options, in particular, including things like run-on. And the reason for this is to make sure that if people are going to risk transfer, that they are thinking about it and understanding the other options available and whether there could be better outcomes by doing something different. So, so you will see trustees and sponsors will see their advisors coming to them and giving them a lot more advice around this because it is a requirement. And also that advice will also cover things, not just how member benefits could be changed, but also considering things like financial benefits. So securing benefits with an insurer can involve paying a significant premium, and that may be significant over and above the costs of running the scheme themselves. So run-on could be used to generate surplus, and that surplus could then be used to benefit members and sponsors. And in particular, for some overseas parents, in particular those in the US, a surplus generated in the scheme can appear as a positive item in their profit and loss, even if they never actually see the cash. It can be sitting there in the pension scheme, but actually be coming through within the accounting standards as a profit. So there are financial benefits as well as those member benefits to run on. But at the same time, trustees and sponsors need to consider the risks, and in particular that increased reliance on the sponsor covenant, which would need to be carefully managed at the same time. So that's why there's no correct answer on which is best, risk transfer or run on. It really depends on the individual circumstances of the scheme and the circumstances of the sponsor. And that's why both trustees and sponsor need to have a conversation rather than just making a decision without that consultation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, that trustees and employer need to plan early, need to collaborate and work very closely together. So, for example, thinking about the sort of legal powers in a scheme deed and rules, schemes, because of the way they've been drafted in the past, can frankly have a bit of a lottery on what their return of surplus powers are. Now, of course, we're waiting on further information from the government, and who knows whether we'll get some changes or overrides or whatever to the return of surplus rules. But actually, at the moment, what an employer, a scheme, trustees of a scheme wouldn't want to do is design a run-on strategy to try to extract surplus to, say, send some back to the employer if actually the surplus rule didn't allow that to happen. Or similarly, you wouldn't want to be an employer telling your trustees, yes, I definitely want to run on in circumstances where the trustees would prefer to wind up and the trustees have a wind up trigger. So understanding the powers in your rules for both trustees and employers is an important part of that planning process, I think. But what you were saying, there are potential benefits for the right scheme and the right circumstances for members, but also for employers. That there are reasons why particular schemes, might want to run on rather than buying out.
And knowing who the surplus should go to is such a difficult question for trustees to determine where they do have the power in their rules. I'm seeing lots of clients at the moment seeking advice around this and how they should, or what factors are relevant for them to consider. Sarah, how do you think people should approach considering how to receive surplus and who should get paid to?
It's a really interesting area because I don't think there's one size fits all on this one. It really depends on, once you've looked at the rules, there's also a huge number of other factors to consider. Yeah. For example, what are the discretionary increases within the scheme? What happened in times of deficit? Yeah. What was the member contribution rate? Did you increase member contributions through difficult times? So there's lots of kind of questions of fact around it. But also, if a scheme is giving out surplus, many sponsors worry about the impact of, for example, granting discretionary pension increases, as that increase isn't just the payment of that extra increase, but it increases liabilities going forward. And by increasing future liabilities, you also increase future risk and the chance that those benefits can't be paid in the future. The other issue with granting discretionary increases as a way of distributing surplus is that many deferred members won't see that discretionary increase until they retire, which could be many, many years from now. So what I'd really like to see to kind of help this debate and make things a little bit easier is a new type of HMRC authorised payment where schemes would actually be allowed to pay surplus to members straight away now as a taxed lump sum. So that would mean that any surpluses that arise could be treated as a windfall both on the sponsor and to the members, and that could be shared with everybody without further promises needing to be accumulated. And I actually think that could be a real game changer for these debates, because I think the real concern is that kind of compounding liabilities by giving bigger benefits, but then causing problems further down the line. Something else that is very interesting and that can be done at the moment is using surplus to fund future accrual, or indeed to fund DC contributions for other members within the scheme. Now, technically, if you're using the DC contributions for other members, that's not going to your existing members, and so that could be seen as a refund to the sponsor by another route, but it is going into pension provision, so it is helping achieve the objective of increasing retirement saving. And I think that's quite a powerful argument that effectively you are using that surplus to build retirement benefits. The optimist in me thinks it could even be used to fund new DB accrual. I think, especially referring back to my previous comments around sponsors having long memories about those difficult times with volatile deficits, I don't think many will be thinking of using surplus for increased defined benefit accrual. But the optimist in me kind of hopes that perhaps we could see a resurgence of DB, even if it was only one or two schemes opening. I think it could completely change the landscape, but perhaps that's me being a little bit too optimistic about the future.
What you say about all of these developments, if there is surplus to be generated in existing DB schemes that can be used to either provide DB or one-off payments directly as an authorised payment to members, or DC in the same trusts, or perhaps by taking money out of the employer and then letting the employer use it for other DC provision. It feels like we're in a real time of innovation at the moment, and there must be some changes are coming to really innovate and encourage saving. Not least on the day we're recording. Of course, by the time this goes out, it will be a few days later now. But today, as we're recording, we've had the news of the new Royal Mail collective plan, which is the UK's first collective defined contribution scheme. So, sort of right on topic, on point, and a sort of a new innovative way of saving in UK pensions.
Indeed, with the DWP also consulting on options for how you can use defined benefit scheme surplus. So we're very much kind of waiting to see what policy might emerge from that. And as mentioned earlier, some trustees and sponsors are waiting to see what will come from that before finally formalising what they want to do. Yeah. I think actually enabling employers to access surplus on an ongoing basis with controls in place might actually encourage employers to fund their schemes to a stronger level, and that could be in the interests of both those sponsors and in the interests of members. It will definitely make sponsors more engaged with their schemes as well. And I think at the same time, though, that engagement could mean sponsors are much more thinking about investment strategy, and it could lead to a lot of change within how defined benefit schemes are run. But at the other end of it, many schemes are still very much committed to their de-risking journeys. They've, years of kind of de-risking, getting to that fully funded on a buyout position. And I think for those, it would seem too far to do a complete U-turn when they finally got to their destination and say, no, we think run-on is best for us because they have worked so hard to get where they are.
There's so much we could cover today. I mean, we haven't even touched on consolidators such as Clara or a possible public consolidator, but that will have to be in a later podcast episode. If our listeners do want to hear more about defined benefit consolidation, we did an episode on that, season 2, episode 2 of the podcast. But Sarah, do you have any final takeaways for our listeners?
I think my final thought is just there is so much to think about at the moment, and I think there is no right answer. Whether it's risk transfer or run-on, either could be right for your scheme. I think the key thing is to engage with the decision and to think about what you want to achieve, and engage with those things about if you had a surplus, what would you do with that surplus, and really test the decision and discuss trustees and sponsors working together to get a good outcome.
I think that's a good final message. That I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Work together, and it's the collaboration that brings about the good solutions, I think.
Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Sarah, and giving us your valuable insights.
Thank you. It's been really interesting talking to you.
So thank you for listening to the Burges Salmon Pensions Pod. Our next episode will cover defined contribution use of liquids in productive finance, in particular looking at long-term funding targets. If you'd like to know more about our pensions team and how our experts can work with you, you can contact myself, Chris, or any of our team via our website. All of our episodes are available on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for listening.